Imagine being laughed at, mocked, and dismissed as just a janitor, only to sit at a billionaire's piano and leave the entire room speechless. This is the story of Marcus, the man who turned humiliation into triumph and played a melody so powerful it changed his life forever. "Play this piano, and I'll marry you." The bold, thunderous voice echoed across the grand hall of a luxurious mansion, silencing the chatter of the wealthy guests. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the polished marble floors reflected the glow of golden lights, and in the center of the room, all eyes turned toward the source of the challenge, Alexander Kingsley, one of the richest men in the city. Alexander wasn't just rich, he was infamous. Known for his arrogance and love of control, he had built his empire on both brilliance and ruthlessness. And tonight, at yet another of his extravagant parties, he wanted more than admiration. He wanted to humiliate, to mock, and to be entertained at the expense of others. In the center of the hall sat a magnificent black grand piano, its surface shining like a mirror beneath the crystal chandelier. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a statement, a symbol of wealth and refinement. Guests circled it, whispering, chuckling, curious about what game Alexander was playing this time. With a sly smirk, Alexander stepped closer to the piano, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This piano," he declared, raising his hand as though presenting a priceless treasure, "is not just wood and keys. Tonight it is a test, a challenge. If anyone in this room can play it beautifully, I swear, I will not only reward them with riches, but grant them the hand of my daughter in marriage." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Glasses froze midair. Murmurs erupted instantly. At the edge of the stage, standing quietly, was Clarissa Kingsley, Alexander's only daughter. She was the opposite of her father in every way, gentle, kind, and elegant without arrogance. Her dark hair fell gracefully over her shoulders. Her eyes reflected sincerity, not greed. But at that moment, those eyes widened in disbelief. She hadn't known her father planned this. To turn her into a prize, like some trophy for a childish contest, was humiliating. She shifted uncomfortably, her face burning with embarrassment, but Alexander continued, oblivious to her discomfort. The guests, however, were entertained. Some chuckled. Others clapped at the absurdity of it all. To them, it was nothing more than another one of Alexander's dramatic games. One by one, a few brave souls approached the piano. The first man, an investment broker, pressed the keys with stiff fingers. The sound was flat, awkward, more like noise than music. Alexander laughed, his booming voice echoing across the room. Pathetic. That was less music and more torture. Next, another guest tried, a woman who claimed she had taken lessons years ago. She managed a simple tune, but stumbled quickly, her hands stiff with nerves. Again, Alexander waved her away with cruel amusement. Is this the best this city has to offer? Children could play better than this. The humiliation grew sharper with each attempt. The laughter of the rich echoed in the hall, feeding Alexander's ego. He was in his element, mocking others, proving his superiority. But then, just as he prepared to call for another volunteer, something unexpected happened. From the far corner of the hall, where the servants usually stood quietly, someone moved. A tall figure, dressed in plain work clothes, with a mop still in his hand, began walking slowly toward the piano. The guests turned in confusion. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is he serious? A janitor? Here, what could he possibly know about music? Even Alexander's eyebrows shot up in disbelief before a cruel smile spread across his lips. Well, this is rich. My janitor wants to try. By all means, come forward. Let's see what kind of talent scrubbing floors give the man. The room erupted in laughter again. But Clarissa didn't laugh. Her eyes fixed on a man approaching the piano, curiosity flickering in her heart. Something told her this moment was about to change everything. No one expected what was about to happen next. At the edge of the glittering hall, away from the perfume and laughter of the wealthy, stood Marcus, the janitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet, a man in his late 40s with skin weathered by years of labor. His simple uniform was smudged with faint stains from the endless scrubbing he did every day, and in his hand he held the mop that was his daily companion. Marcus had always been invisible here. The guests barely noticed him, except when they needed their spills cleaned or their shoes polished by his rag. Tonight was no different, at least until the billionaire's cruel laughter rang out across the hall. Alexander's mocking voice cut through the air, ridiculing the failed attempts at the piano. Every insult drew more laughter from the wealthy audience, but as Marcus watched, something stirred deep inside him. His eyes fell on the glossy, black, grand piano in the center of the room. For the first time in years, he wasn't just looking at an instrument. He was looking at a piece of his own past. Once, long ago, Marcus had lived for music. His fingers had danced across piano keys as if born to do so. Music had been his dream, his lifeline. But dreams didn't pay rent. Tragedy, bills, and endless responsibilities had buried that dream, forcing him into the humble role of janitor. He had locked away that part of himself until tonight. "Don't just stand there, Marcus," a guest sneered suddenly, noticing his gaze. "Want to try your luck? Who knows? Maybe the billionaire will make you his son-in-law." The words dripped with sarcasm, and the crowd erupted with laughter. Champagne glasses clinked, and rich voices mocked him from every corner. Alexander himself chuckled, shaking his head as if the very idea were absurd. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he said, "Oh, please. A janitor? What does a janitor know about pianos? The man spends his days cleaning floors, not concert halls." The crowd laughed harder, encouraged by the billionaire's words. To them, Marcus was nothing more than background scenery. But Marcus didn't flinch. His face remained calm, unreadable, though deep within him, a storm was building. Slowly, he leaned his mop against the wall, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then, without saying a word, he began to walk toward the piano. The sound of his footsteps against the marble floor echoed in the sudden hush that fell over the room. The laughter faded, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. One by one, the wealthy guests turned to watch him, their amusement shifting into curiosity. His walk was steady, unhurried. He carried himself with quiet dignity, each step filled with a confidence that seemed almost out of place in a man dressed so plainly. He looked neither proud nor ashamed, just determined. Clarissa, still standing near her father, felt her breath catch. Something about Marcus was different. His silence, his composure, the way he looked at the piano, not like it was a toy, but like it was an old friend. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart fluttered with a strange sense of hope. "Surely, he's not serious," someone whispered. "This will be hilarious," another guest snickered. But Clarissa's eyes stayed locked on Marcus. Unlike the others, she didn't see a janitor approaching a piano. She saw a man who seemed to carry a story no one else in the room understood. And in that moment, as Marcus lowered himself onto the piano bench, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. The laughter was gone. The arrogance was fading. For the first time that evening, the crowd waited in silence. Marcus lowered himself onto the piano bench with the calmness of a man greeting an old friend. His rough, calloused hands hovered above the polished ivory keys, trembling not with fear, but with reverence. He hadn't touched a piano in years, not since life's struggles had forced him to bury his gift. But the moment his fingers brushed across the cool surface of the keys, it was as if time had rolled back. The crowd leaned in, smirks on their faces, expecting the inevitable disaster. To them, this was a joke, a janitor playing in front of billionaires. The air was thick with anticipation, but it wasn't the anticipation of wonder. No, it was the anticipation of laughter. Then, Marcus pressed the first note. It rang through the hall, soft but commanding, carrying a warmth that seemed almost impossible from a single key. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter faded. The note hung in the air like a whisper of truth, demanding silence. Then came another note, and another. Slowly, carefully, Marcus began to weave them together, and suddenly, the hall was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with music. His hands, though aged and scarred by years of labor, moved with grace and precision. The melody was gentle at first, like a lullaby whispered to a child. But soon, his fingers flowed faster, his chords growing deeper, more layered. He wasn't just playing music, he was painting emotions in the air. The mocking eyes of the guests widened in shock. Their smiles faded. The room stood frozen, unable to look away. Marcus's music carried stories, stories that words could never tell. With each rising note, he shared his struggles, the pain of dreams deferred, the bitterness of long nights spent working thankless jobs. With each gentle fall of the melody, he revealed glimpses of hope, of love, of the man he used to be. The piano sang of resilience. It cried of heartbreak. It whispered of beauty buried under hardship. And it soared with the triumphant spirit of a soul that refused to be broken. Clarissa felt her throat tighten, her eyes shimmering with tears. She had attended concerts by the finest pianists in the country, heard music in grand theaters performed by celebrated names, but none of it compared to this. Marcus wasn't just playing for applause. He was playing because his heart demanded it, because every note carried a piece of his life. The longer he played, the more the atmosphere in the hall transformed. The arrogance, the wealth, the mockery, all of it faded. There was no billionaire, no janitor, no social divide. There was only music. And then, as if his soul had finally said all it needed to say, Marcus struck the final chord. It lingered in the air, heavy and pure, wrapping around every ear and every heart in the room. Silence followed. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe, as if the music still echoed in their bones. Then it began. A slow clap, hesitant at first, then another, and then another. Within seconds, the silence shattered into an eruption of thunderous applause. The guests rose to their feet, clapping wildly, cheering with abandon. Some even whistled, their eyes wide with disbelief. The very same people who had laughed at Marcus moments earlier were now applauding him as if he were a master, a legend. The janitor had become, if only for that moment, the greatest man in the room. Alexander's jaw dropped, his smug expression crumbling into disbelief. For the first time that evening, the billionaire was silent. The man who thrived on ridicule, who relished in humiliating others, now stood speechless in his own grand hall. He had mocked Marcus before the janitor had even touched the keys, yet now the evidence was undeniable. The man he dismissed as nothing but help had just revealed himself to be a true genius. "Impossible," Alexander muttered, his voice low, almost trembling. His fingers twitched at his sides, as though he could hardly contain the storm of anger and embarrassment boiling within him. But the silence didn't last long. A guest broke it with a shout, his voice filled with awe. "That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard." Another chimed in quickly, pointing toward Marcus as if he were some revelation. "He's better than any professional I've paid to hear." Remarkable. The room, once full of mocking laughter, was now filled with admiration. Heads nodded, voices praised, hands clapped. The same guests who had sneered at Marcus were now on their feet, their applause still echoing like thunder. And through it all, Clarissa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Her cheeks flushed, not from shame, but from admiration. She gazed at Marcus as if seeing him for the very first time. "That was incredible," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity. Marcus bowed his head humbly, but Alexander's reaction was very different. His pride, his most valuable possession, had been struck at its core. His laughter, once booming with confidence, now came out strained and nervous. "Well," he stammered, tugging at his expensive cufflinks, "a promise is a promise, I suppose." He forced a chuckle, trying to reclaim authority. "The janitor played beautifully, yes. I'll admit that much. But surely you all know I wasn't serious about marriage. It was a game, a bit of entertainment. Nothing more." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some nodded in agreement, relieved to think it had been a mere spectacle. But others frowned, exchanging uneasy glances. Alexander had spoken boldly, with all the arrogance of a man who never expected to be challenged. His words had been clear. Now, To dismiss them so casually would make him look like a liar, a coward who couldn't stand by his own boasts. Clarissa's eyes hardened as she turned to face her father. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "You made a challenge, father, and he met it with more honor, more heart, and more talent than anyone here. If you won't keep your word, then what does your promise mean?" The crowd fell silent again. Every head turned toward Alexander. The weight of judgment pressed down on him. His face flushed crimson, his jaw tightening as pride battled shame. He was trapped, exposed before his guests, before his daughter, before the very man he had mocked. For once in his life, Alexander Kingsley wasn't in control. Marcus rose slowly from the piano bench, his movements calm and deliberate. He bowed his head humbly, not to the wealthy guests, but to the music itself, as though honoring the gift that had flowed through him. His voice was quiet when he spoke, yet every word carried across the silent hall. "I never meant to cause trouble," Marcus said softly. "I only wish to share the music within me. Marriage, wealth, these are not things I seek. Music is my gift, and tonight, I only wanted it to be heard." His words struck the crowd with the same power as his music had. They had expected arrogance or pride, but instead found humility. It humbled them in return. Clarissa stepped forward, her face glowing with emotion. Her eyes shone with sincerity, her voice trembling not with fear, but with conviction. "And yet," she said, "you've already given us something far more valuable than wealth. You reminded us all what true talent and heart look like. You've shown us beauty that no amount of money can buy." The guests erupted into cheers, clapping and nodding in agreement. Some even shouted praise, their admiration genuine. The same people who had laughed at him earlier now looked at Marcus with respect, as if they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. Alexander, still standing stiffly at the front, finally felt the weight of the moment. His pride, so unshakable before, had crumbled. In his own mansion, before his own guests, he had been outshined, not by another billionaire, not by a famed musician, but by the man he had always overlooked. At last, with effort heavy in his voice, Alexander lowered his head. "You have my respect, Marcus." The words sounded reluctant, but they were genuine. For a man like Alexander, admitting respect to someone he had once mocked was no small thing. From that night on, Marcus's life would never be the same. Word of his talent spread quickly, carried by the very people who had once doubted him. The story of the janitor who humbled a billionaire with music became more than gossip. It became legend. Opportunities came his way. Doors he thought had closed forever swung open once again. But Marcus remained the same humble man. He continued to work, continued to live simply, though now he played whenever he could, sharing his gift not for fame, but for the joy of touching hearts. And Clarissa? She sought Marcus's company more and more. What had begun as admiration grew into friendship, and soon, something deeper. She admired not just his music, but his kindness, his wisdom, his humility, the very qualities missing in her father's world of wealth. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day, blossoming into a love her father could neither buy nor control. What began as a cruel joke ended as a story of dignity, respect, and love. Because greatness does not always wear a suit or live in a mansion. Sometimes greatness is hidden in the quiet hands of someone the world ignores, until at last the music begins to play. Back-end index pointing right. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales just like this one. Your support helps us keep these stories coming.